And with all the turmoil over the Rendlesham Forest UFO case, has your interest changed with the field of ufology?
Jerry, thank you for that question. As some of you know, even though I have researched several dozen different subjects involved in the UFO story in depth over the decades, and my original involvement and a consistent involvement for me, very much in a human sense, is the abduction phenomena, which for me is the most significant, the most disturbing, the most complex aspect, and may offer answers to questions. But my name, for many people, more than anything else in the field, is associated with the Rendlesham case, which I first began to look into more than 30 years ago, with a man who alleged that he was involved in the events of December 1980, and who may have been involved to some degree. At this point, I don't know. I did my investigations. I returned repeatedly to England with my co-author of the book I eventually wrote with Larry Warren called Left at East Gate. And at a certain point in my research and my development of a relationship with my co-author, I felt I could really begin to take his word for things. He had checked out in a number of respects, and being a very nice person and somebody who doesn't want to upset other people, I decided basically to just go with what he was saying, and it was a big mistake. We now know that there are a lot of holes in his account, that there are parts of the book that we wrote together that I can no longer stand behind relative to this, that, or the other. It resulted for me in more than a year and a half ago of having to not only completely reevaluate all that I had stood by him on, but go through a really unhappy and unpleasant process that it's sort of like the stages of accepting death on a certain level, anger, rejection, sadness, rage, ultimately acceptance. And before I really was able to accept how much my high intentions and good work, I thought, had helped to convince people of things that might not be true, and in some cases were definitely not true. I went through a period of some months of denial, embarrassment, anger at myself, anger at my co-author, spent months seeking out and connecting with people who I had apologies to, and I've not finished that list yet, taking all the responsibility I can for it. And very sadly last year, when all of this completely blew up in the public realm, our publisher, a small press in New York City, and this was the updated edition of the book. The initial book came out actually in 1997 after 9 years of work. And an updated and expanded edition of the book, the one that most readers have, came out in 2005 to mark the 25th anniversary of the events. I had to bring this to the attention of our publisher, and the head of that publishing house happens to be a really nice guy, honest, decent, and dedicated to helping people have access to books on unusual subjects. And it was with a combination of frustration, sadness, embarrassment, anger, that I could only encourage to have the publishing investigation of the allegations for and against the credibility of my co-author. And they did. They began it last October, and at that point the book went into temporary printing and distribution suspension. After that, they did their investigation for some months. I had written 2 follow-up books on the same subject. One, a free book that was online that primarily attacked the work of somebody who had been a friend and a colleague before everything blew up, a name well well known in the field, Nick Pope, and the other attacking the former deputy base commander of RAF Bentwaters at the time of the events, Charles I. Hall. I have apologized to both of them because there are parts of both books that were based on my believing something that was not true. And so I voluntarily removed both of those books from public access. They will never be available again. And in January, just 2 months ago, our publisher completed their investigation, and as of January, the book left at Eastgate, although I'm sure it will eternally be able to be found in used copies and things, will no longer be published. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. With that understood, I am very proud of what is true in that book. For example, there are over 300 fact-checked annotated footnotes that revolve around the story, factual information. My account, my personal account in the book, I stand behind also and always will, where it is not influenced by information that I believed at the time that I now know is not true or confabulated or part truth, part fiction. And to all of my readers who read that book, I apologize to them. But back to Jerry's initial question, and I'll tie it up quickly because I see we're coming into the end of the show.
Yes.
How has it affected my feelings about Rendlesham? Jerry, it's still one of the most important cases in the history of UFO studies. There's a tremendous amount of evidence having nothing to do with my co-author's account. There are quality witnesses who showed great courage in standing up, other terrific researchers and writers. I personally am burned out on it and will devote my time in future to other areas of UFO study. But I support, stand with, and am very proud of so many contributors to what we now know about the extraordinary events that occurred in Suffolk, England in December of 1980.
Peter, we have 2 minutes to close.